Hello, everyone. Hello, I'm Patrick Quement, and I'm going to tell you about my design story. So I'm going to make this presentation about my design story, which I have in fact titled Pushing the Boundaries, which is exactly what I've tried to do over the years. Now, a few words about my early life. I was born in Marseille in the south of France, and my father, you see here, was a French colonel in the Foreign Legion, in the French Foreign Legion, and my mother was English and was, in fact, a nurse. When I was just 11 years old, my father died in a freak accident driving alongside a person who had just passed their driving license in a car that person had just won in a lottery a couple of months before that. My mother decided to send me to school in Great Britain because apparently I was a bit of a handful. And so I went to this public school, which was a great place because I learned many things. First, of course, is I learned to speak English, which has been a great advantage over the years. And I also learned this game called rugby, which the British say about it that it is a game of ruffians played by gentlemen, which is quite the opposite of football, which of course is a game of hooligans, which is a game of gentlemen played by hooligans. Now, I always, right from very early age, wanted to become a designer, and so I went to the Birmingham Institute of Art and Design. Now, why did I want to go there? Well, I wanted to go there because of one man called Naum Slutsky, who had in fact been a professor at the Bauhaus, a very young professor. He was only 23 years old. And the Bauhaus, as you all know, was the most important design school in the 20th century, a school which was oriented towards functionalism, form follows function, the notion of being very purist and also socially conscious. Now, the man that one shouldn't, or the name that one shouldn't utter in front of Naum Slutsky was a certain Raymond Loewy, one of the fathers of streamlining, who felt that modernity and speed had to be applied to everything, including pencil sharpeners. And he was, together with Henry Dreyfus, Darwin Teague, and Norman Bell Geddes, the fathers of this movement of streamlining. This, by the way, is a particularly beautiful design by Raymond Loewy, which is the 1953 Studebaker. Very simple, very clear lines. And when you think of that, this is 1953. Now, they loved speed, they loved modernity. They also were very much involved in planned obsolescence. And to them, as Raymond Loewy once said, the most beautiful curves are the sales curves. Now, this approach of styling versus design, this sort of antagonistic approach, is something which has continued over the years, still exists today, as symbolized by the Coca-Cola drink fountain and the Marcel Breuer tubular chair. As I finished my studies, I went and looked for a job, wrote about 100 letters, must have received something between 6 or 7. I eventually chose to go for a company, an automobile company. I loved motor cars even then, and I went and joined a company called Simco, which had been bought by Chrysler just recently. And I didn't stay too long, but I'd like to show you my first project, which, no, it's not the car, it's actually the hubcap. But I know you only are looking at the hubcap, but the car actually was designed by Giugiaro. I designed the hubcap. Funnily enough, they tend to remember the car and not the hubcap. After Simca, I left to go for a totally different company, which was Ford Motor Company, which I joined in 1968. It was a company I was to stay in 17 years, and I went from designer to director of design of Ford of Germany. I lived in England and in Germany, in the United States, but I also did projects in various countries, be it Australia, Brazil, and spent a lot of time also in Japan. I'd like to show you a couple of the projects that I was responsible for in Ford. One is the Ford Cargo, which is an interesting truck. It's still being built. It was launched in 1981. It was Truck of the Year, and it's still being built 32 years later. And the other one is in fact, a concept car which led to this vehicle called the Ford Sierra, which was a car which was important when it was launched. It had quite a good career, and it was a vehicle which responded to the energy crisis, being one of the very first to actually develop strong aerodynamics, and also in terms of aesthetics. Now, I stayed in Ford all these years, but I left because my future was to live in Detroit, and I certainly didn't want to live in Detroit. Probably very few people want to live in Detroit. So I changed companies, and I was invited to join the Volkswagen Audi group, and I was hired to become eventually the first group director. I met Dr. Hahn in Washington. He asked me to join the company. I then moved back from the United States. I went to Europe, and I discovered where I was going to work, which is a place called Wolfsburg, which I immediately renamed Stalingrad. And it is, in fact, a very charming place, a little bit close in feeling to that of Detroit, not necessarily the most welcoming place that you would want to live in. During the time of these 2 years that I spent in the Volkswagen Audi, I worked on 2 projects, but I will show you the one which is probably the most important. Apart from the strategy which I worked on for the group, worked on the 3rd generation Golf, where we designed 2 totally different approaches, one more advanced with a split backlight, which you see here, which was later to come out 13 years later on the Audi as the A2, and then this car, which had a lot of influence on what was to become the 3rd generation of Golf. I was ready for a move because clearly Wolfsburg was not the place where I wanted to live, neither my wife or children. And so I looked with a lot of interest and was very, very receptive to a phone call which was to invite me to move and, in fact, to go to Renault. I had, in fact, applied 11 times in my life in Renault, and I had thoroughly given up when I suddenly was invited to join the company. I met this man called Raymond Lévy, who was the CEO of the company. He interviewed me in his home. I talked to him a lot about design. He said he knew nothing about design, which I thought was a good start. And then he said, well, no, in fact, we had bought something very design. He said we bought a toilet brush at the recent Paris fair, and they sold it to me as being very much of a design object. So the link between my design and his design was a little bit different, but anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed the person. He had a great sense of humor. And what is more important is that when I left his home, he had given me what we in French call carte blanche, which means a totally free hand to remodel, to reconstruct, to reorganize the styling organization of Renault into a new organization, which I'm now going to talk to you about. And he wrote me this wonderful letter a few years later, which said, you credit me for the merit of having given you carte blanche, but the merit of the success goes back to the one who was able to use that freedom, and you know what the whole of Renault owes you in the way that you used it. Now, this is a kind of letter that when you receive that from your boss, you tend to keep it. And I did. And I did, hence the reason why I'm reading it out to you today. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about my mission. My mission was clearly to move from styling to design. And up till then, the styling organization was answering to engineering, and I felt this should be a change. And in fact, Renault was very much of an engineer bias company. And when styling answered to engineering, the head of engineering asked what the mission of styling was. He declared, well, styling is in fact all to do with dressing up the hunchback, which is another way of putting lipstick on the pig. So one of the first things that we did when I joined the company was to put was still then called the styling organization, but on par with product planning, with engineering, and so forth. And that made already quite a big change. But very little time after that, we created Renault Industrial Design, which was an activity that I was to head for 22 years. First thing that we did was to internationalize the team. And there's a bit of sound missing there. No? Here we are. Internationalize the team. When I joined the company, we were 126 strong. 22 years later, we were 470. But more important was the fact that we had a thoroughly international team with 28 different nationalities. 28 different nationalities, as well as 50% of the designers were foreign. And we covered, our responsibilities covered really from cradle to grave, all the way into production, making audits. We changed our organization at first to something very simple with 5 departments. We created an advanced design area which didn't exist. Then we, of course, had exterior design, interior design, which for long had been looked upon as being inferior design. And we created a strong activity, autonomous color and trim, because we felt that color and trim is something where we could play our Frenchness a little bit differently to others. And then having spent so many years, 19 years in Ford and Volkswagen Audi, we created a perceived quality which was very much new within the company. Now, we also had a large activity which is like commercial vehicles and trucks, as well as buses and agricultural tractors. On the technological side, we moved from plaster, which was the Latin use of material, both in Italy and in France, to clay, which was used in the rest of the world. And then one word to say that digital, there was a digital department, very close, very small, and I was very much impressed by what they were doing, and we doubled their budget year after year for many years to make it into a sizable activity, and I'll talk about that later. So let's talk about the strategy. Let's talk about the strategy when we began with the 3 phases of design. The first one began in 1988, and there the mission was quite simple. The CEO of the company had said to us, we want to get back to be an innovative company in the way that we had been in the past, namely a company who invented the third door on the Renault 4, which came out in 1961, or the Renault 16, which had this very interesting modular interior, or the Renault 5, launched in 1972, which was a very good-looking and charming little car, which had something very new for the time, namely these plastic bumpers. Now, I don't know if anyone here would know what was the second car in the world to come out with these plastic bumpers. Anybody shout out? No? It's the Mercedes. Mercedes launched plastic bumpers on their upper series, their S segment, which is interesting, sort of the very much of a very affordable car, and then the top of the range. All right. Another vehicle which had a lot of influence at the time was the Espace, which was a one-box design with a very modular interior. We began with what we called the Z program, which was concept cars. Concept cars were there to illustrate what we were doing. We were too impatient to wait 5 years for our vehicles to come on the market, so we wanted to communicate on the new Renault. And these are, in fact, the first 3 concept cars that we launched. The first one being the Laguna concept, which had a very voluptuous exterior and an interior inspired by the world of motorbikes, with the seats influenced by David Hockney's swimming pools. This car had this concept car had a lot of influence. It became a new segment, blockbuster in Europe. It was called Scenic, and I'll talk about the production version that came out a few years later. We did this vehicle which we called a first crossover, and it was a crossover between a sports car and an earth-moving equipment. You know, quite a funny change. This one was not a serious attempt at promoting a new concept, but just showing that we were prepared to be highly creative and to look in all different directions. Then we produced the Ludo and the Modus, which was launched in 1994, and it was mobility in urban vehicle. And it was the first to show a hybrid electric engine. And you have to remember, this is 20 years earlier. Another concept car which was one of my favorites is Argos. Argos, l'Esprit Nouveau, which was the name of the movement in France headed by Le Corbusier in the 20s, which was similar to the Bauhaus. And basically, it was a statement which said, simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. We wanted to get back to this sort of strong design statements. It didn't have much influence on a particular product in the Renault range, but it did have a major influence at Audi, because they came out with the Audi TT, and Freeman Thomas, who designed the car, said so when he left the company. He said how important the Argos had been on and how it had influenced the vehicle. Okay, now let's talk about production vehicles. The first one is this cheeky-looking little car called the Twingo, which I presented to the president as being a pet. I said to him, you know, this car, in the winter, when it's cold outside, you don't leave it on the curbside. You take it under your arm and you go and place it in front of the chimney. Get it warm. It was a car which had a lot of infighting, you know, lots of fight to get onto the market, had some market research which wasn't too great, and I sent a letter to Raymond Lévy, the CEO of the company, and I said, you know, I think the biggest risk for the company is not to take any risk, and I ask you to choose an instinctive design rather than extinctive marketing. And he agreed. We launched the car, and it was in fact highly, highly successful. So let's move on now to the second phase of design, which lasted 7 years, like the first, began in 1995. There we were going for a search for a very strong identity. And the first vehicle that we showed was the Initial, which was our idea of a French statement in the upper segment, luxury segment. Unfortunately, the company elected not to pursue that route because they felt that we were going too far up and didn't feel the company was ready, which was something which I've regretted all my career. The next vehicle was a vehicle, Versatis, which was designed for the centenary of Renault, 100 years, with this rear end, which reminds you of flamboyant French carrosserie of pre-war. Here you see it again. And the front end, representing the last 50 years, represented by this one-box design, which at the time we felt was the epitome of modernity. Another concept car. At the time, this was the one-box Koleos SUV, which I felt had a lot of potential, very simple interior. You'll find the notion of simplicity something which we have pursued, which I have pursued very strongly for many, many, many years. And then I land on the concept car with Talisman that was designed to demonstrate this search for simplicity with what we call touch design, very intuitive design, something which was applied to all of our range of vehicles in the forthcoming years. On the production side, of course, a lot less glamorous, but a vehicle which was extraordinarily successful. This is a Scenic. This vehicle was built up to 2,000 a day. 2,000 vehicles a day. Can you imagine that? And this vehicle, the president of the time, Louis Schweitzer, told me that it was through this vehicle that Renault, that had made so much money, could actually buy a large part of Nissan, and that came a little bit later. Okay, just to show you concept cars, production cars, just to show you that it does, there is indeed a very strong link between the workout here and what became the Megane 2, which was a car of the year and a very successful production vehicle. Still on production side, an amusing vehicle, which was the mid-engine Clio V6, or what about this one, which you could see without a windshield, very close to the concept car Laguna that we had presented so many years before that. Then the same car, but with a windshield. And then on these small commercial vehicles, the Kangoo, which was a brand new concept, which was a very clean, friendly vehicle, and it was the first to come out with two sliding doors, one on either side. And then just to show that good design can be applied also to commercial vehicles, this was a Traffic, which had quite a sophisticated interior, and I think pretty good looking. Now, it was during those last days of 1994 that I was asked to make a conference at the Quality Symposium in Renault, and I made this, gave a title, Design, a Question of Quality. And after this presentation, the president, Louis Schweitzer, invited me, and he said to me, this was in July 2004, he said, look, the head of quality is going to leave the company, and I would like you to become the senior vice president of quality. Of course, you can continue with your design activity, and you will become a board member. And he said, well, don't answer me immediately. Go on your vacation, have a nice vacation, tell me when you come back. Of course, I had a lousy vacation because I thought all the time about that, and I thought to myself, can I actually say no? And of course, the answer was no. And so I joined. This is Louis Schweitzer who asked me the question. And suddenly, well, my life changed dramatically because quality was 70% of my time, design was only 30%. I was forever battling for quality, and this is what board meetings looked like. I know it sounds like a joke, it looks like a joke, but it isn't. And I'm not sure whose teeth it is, but some people lost teeth, I can assure you. All right, now, I did this job for 4 years, and it was extremely long. It was a huge job, 6,000 people, in charge of 6,000 people going all over the world because quality was everything. And then this thing happened, which big event in the company, the creation of the Renault-Nissan regrouping, which allowed me then to free myself from quality and return back to design, which meant that I was given this assignment to help Nissan along, to rethink and readdress their design organization and to go and search for a top designer. And this I did and found this man who is still today Senior Vice President in charge of quality, Shiro Nakamura, who's a good friend and a great designer. Anyway, I was 100% back with design, And what I found when I looked back, and I found that the company in those 4 years, little by little, they got back to dressing up the hunchback or, as I said, putting lipstick on the pig. So it was a decision had to be made. What should we do from then on? And my answer was we had to have new impulse. And this was the beginning of a new approach which led to an international deployment, the opening of the first design center in Barcelona. We chose to have very small design centers right bang in the middle of the cities. And we went 100% digital because we didn't have modeling facilities. And this design center worked on normal programs, but we also worked on projects which we wanted to be secret. Namely, this is a Sandero, which was a project which we did contrary to the product assignment that had been given to us. We didn't agree with the letter that had been given to us. We worked on a different alternative. We went all the way to the day of the presentation without telling anybody. We came up with a proposal as a model, and I nearly got fired, but in fact, this model was chosen, and it has been a highly successful vehicle in all over the world, or anyway, everywhere that it has been sold. After Barcelona, we opened a design center right in the middle of Paris in the Bastille area, and then we continued this international deployment. This is, in fact, when I left the company, the number of design centers that we had all over the place. All these design centers were open with one objective, was to be there where the strategy of the company demanded it. All nice looking, very well designed, I think, interiors and nice locations. And then out of the blues, I received this letter that I had been awarded from the Raymond Loewy Foundation, the Lucky Strike Designer Award. It was a complete surprise, and it was highly remunerated because with the prize money I did something very foolish. In fact, I bought a Ferrari, would you believe it? I mean, I kept it for 6 years. I mean, what a silly thing to do, but I did in any case. But before going to the ceremony that you see here, I read again the book from Raymond Loewy called Never Leave Well Enough Alone. And in that book, there is one great idea, which is called Maya, the Maya concept. Now, you remember what the Maya concept is? It's, in fact, most advanced, yet acceptable. And basically, I thought, wow, this is exactly what we need. And this was, in fact, the foundation, the influence that led to the third phase of design, which began in 2002, where we wanted to have stronger, immediate seduction. We began, as always, by our concept cars, which was the flame to which we would draw our attention. This was the Fluence. And then this vehicle, very flowing, with a very nice flowing interior. Another concept car that we did applied, in fact, not to a car, but to a truck, which was the Radiance. And then we developed this vehicle very close. It, in fact, turned out to be very close to what we did later, called the Mégane Coupé, with the interior, which had a lot of influence on other programs, we did. Now, on the production side, this is the Scenic 3, which is a very good seller still today, a high-selling vehicle. Still on the production side, the Laguna Coupe, influenced by the concept car that I first showed you, called Fluence. And then we worked on our electrical range, our zero-emission vehicles, the Zoe, and then afterwards, after the Zoe, the Twizy, which was developed in our Barcelona design center. This was 2005 when we did this work, and at this point in time, Louis Schweitzer, the CEO, announced that he was retiring. I felt that I was going to go and do something else, but in fact, this man became the new head of the alliance of both Nissan and Renault, Carlos Ghosn. He asked me to stay, firstly because he wanted me to find my successor, and so I accepted. But he also launched a huge program developing 26 new vehicles in a period of 4 years. And this, of course, meant that we had to rethink completely the way that we did our product development. And this is something which we worked on, where we applied all the things that we had learned in our digital development process over the years. All right, I want to talk to you about something completely different, something which we all face as designers. How do you maintain your designers open-minded? People in the automobile industry, they're so in love with motor cars that they have this sort of incestuous relationship. And in fact, it's very important to get our designers to look out and see 360 degrees. And so we began a project which was called Transmission, and you know, phonetically it sounds like transmission. And basically it was taking designers on missions around the world to go and have a look at things like the Milan Furniture Show. But over a period of 10 years, we did 36 missions, we visited 23 cities, and this involved 170 designers to acquire a better understanding of the market, to look at trends, to develop their skills. Let me show you, in fact, the byproduct. We made a report, and we also made each time a little film. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let me just, as you all know, all good things come to an end. And in fact, after 42 years in the automobile industry, I reached the end of my career. I had been, I'm not sure whether I should be proud to say that, I'd been responsible for the production of 60 million cars. I'd stayed on 4 years longer than I expected. I did find my successor, who is a good-looking guy and also extremely talented. And, well, this, I could say, was the end, or is it? Well, not quite, because one of the things I did immediately I left Renault was to write a biography, which occupied me for a couple of months. But then the next thing was to look back upon my career, and this was something which was a magazine, that German magazine, which was published, and which, of course, made me feel very happy. Anybody would. It showed the people who had influenced the different decades, with Ali Earle at the top for the 1950s, and Sergio Pininfarina for the 60s, Marcello Gandini for the 70s, Bruno Sacco of Mercedes for the 80s, myself for the 90s, and Chris Bengal for the years 2000. Now, it's not necessarily true, but it made me feel good. Okay, in my life, you know, I must say I've had a really interesting life. I met some extremely interesting people like Henry Ford, like Philip Stark, Andre Putman, whom I love particularly. I worked with Shiro Nakamura, spent a lot of time with Chris Bengal, and would you believe it, I actually got my first iTunes from Steve Jobs. It's really on the table there. It was a gift he brought me. Anyway, very enjoyable time, and I thought to myself, well, what's next? Well, the what's next could have been just to enjoy what they call the good life and buy another Ferrari, which I didn't want to do. What I wanted to do was to learn to draw again. And I was contacted by a very well-known, very serious magazine called Playboy, who asked me if I could design an iconic object or draw an iconic object. And I did this. This was my first drawing. And I thought, hey, this is easy to draw, you know. And of course, you never get a free lunch. All my drawings for the next few months were just awful. It just so happened that this one was okay. So I learned how to draw, and learning how to draw, I wanted to become just a simple designer, and I decided to go in a field which I knew nothing about, which was boats. And this is the first boat that I designed, the Outremer 5X. And then the next boat that I worked on is the trawler, the Garcia GT 54. Yes, both were awarded European Prize of Boat of the Year 2013. And I've continued to design boats, and this is another one which was launched 1 year ago, the Lagoon, which is Lagoon being the biggest manufacturer of catamarans. And then this one which was launched at Miami, the L52. And basically I'm continuing from then, I'm working on my 20th boat design right now. And basically this was it, except for this. This is probably the most exciting project I've ever worked on. It's called the Sustainable Design School. It was opened in October. And our signature, which says it all, it's Design Innovation for Human Solutions. And I must say that this happens to be my love project. Thank you so much, everyone. I did say I was going to be long, but you see, I gave you 8 seconds.
Yes. Thank you for sharing your lifelong experience with us. It's incredibly impressive, and I'm dumbfounded. I wouldn't know even where to begin. But it's interesting how some of the 1950s design histories or production or even writers have inspired some of your work today. And for me, it's super interesting to also see how the digital technology has transformed production.
Yes.
And with the boat industry, I suppose that's a new industry and love for you. But what would be next for you?
Well, I think that I'm going to say that this is probably where I'm going to stay, and namely I'm going to concentrate on transmission, namely education. I will continue to take on boat projects. I run a one-man company, and currently I'm working on 4 distinct projects. So I'm spending a lot of time on that, and the rest of the time with the school, where I go twice a month. I go down for 3 days to teach our students.
Great. And what could you tell us more? I know we only have a few more minutes left, but I think the Sustainable Design School is a new initiative, and it must have helped shape why you want to lead this new project.
Yes, well, we are, in fact, two other founders. Maury Larivière, who founded Strat College 20 years ago, and a very well-known naval architect called Mark van Petegem. We have for an ambition to adjust our students to the new world, to the new requirements. We feel that we are running out of time, and we have been very much surprised to see the number of students who are interested in this project. In the same way, I have to say that very surprised also by the number of companies who were thoroughly with us and right from day one have given us support. So we are currently working on projects on transportation for India, for the sort of bottom of the pyramid, or let's say middle of the pyramid. We're working on recycling of clothes with Suez Environment. We also have a project with Hermes. We have a project with Schneider Electric. So we have lots and lots of projects. And we have one particular thing, is that we accept students coming from a totally different environment when they join us to do a master's. So we have, in fact, students who have already mastered, who already have degrees in sociology or have degrees in engineering or commerce. And we work in teams on these projects, mixing the first years with the fourth years, and working on these fabulous projects that are coming to us on a regular basis.
That's incredible. Actually, we might have time for one question, because we always like to engage our audience in Hong Kong, and there's a lot of students, architects, designers. Would anyone like to ask a question to Patrick Lecomont?
Okay, my name is Emily. I work for the PDD group from UK. I'm actually used to work at Ford in the event studio, and I also study at Strat, so I feel a lot of good connection with you. So my question with your new school is, how does that relate to people that we're designing for?
Well, I think that people are center stage as far as we're concerned. The complete development process, design process, is related to the people. So we do an awful lot of studies. We do a lot of investigation on the ground. Each of the projects that we develop is linked to analysis which is done on the Gamba, on the ground floor. We go and meet people, we go and interview people, and people are, as I've said, design evolution for human solutions. So our complete orientation is people-oriented. I mean, either I'm going to talk to you for an hour, which I don't think we have, but I can only say that this is very, very much where we want to place our school, and all the projects that we are developing so far are 100% in this direction.
Thank you very much, Patrick Le Quement. Let's give him a huge round of applause in inspiring us.